It's 3 a.m. The house is completely quiet. You're asleep, or you're trying to sleep, and somewhere in the room, or down the hall, you can hear it. That sound, the steady, rhythmic spinning of a wheel. Your hamster running. Again. Still, like they've been running for hours. And they're not stopping. And part of you wonders whether they ever actually sleep, or whether they just run all night every night and somehow survive on it. Most people who have heard that sound have also had one of two reactions to it. The first reaction is mild irritation. It's 3 a.m., the wheel is squeaking slightly, and you have to be up in 4 hours. The second reaction is something closer to affection. You think, oh, that's just my hamster being a hamster, running their little legs off in the dark, doing what hamsters do, and you roll over and go back to sleep. But here's what almost nobody thinks. Lying there in the dark listening to that will spin. What does it actually mean? Not in a general sense. Not just hamsters run on wheels, that's their thing. But specifically, what is your hamster's brain doing right now? What is driving that behavior? What need is being met by running? And equally importantly, what happens if that need isn't being met correctly? Because here's the thing that changes everything about the way you hear that sound at 3 a.m. The wheel behavior is not random. It is not just excess energy burning itself off. It is one of the most information-rich behaviors your hamster performs. And what it's telling you about your hamster's inner state, about whether they're thriving or merely coping, about whether their world is meeting their needs or falling short of them, is something that most hamster owners have never been told, and that the pet industry has never had much interest in communicating. Tonight, that changes. Let me start with something that I think will immediately reframe the way you think about this. In the wild, a Syrian hamster, the most common type of pet hamster, travels an average of 5 to 8 miles per night, every night, through fields, along dry riverbeds, through complex underground tunnel networks that they build and maintain and navigate from memory. They are doing this in search of food, in search of mates, in response to seasonal changes in their environment, in response to the deeply embedded biological drive that says, move, cover ground, explore, keep going, 5 to 8 miles, every single night. Now think about your hamster's enclosure. Even a well-sized, appropriately appointed hamster habitat, the kind that meets the current behavioral science recommendations, is at most a few square feet of physical space. There is no field. There is no riverbed. There is no 5-mile route through varied terrain that changes with the seasons and rewards exploration with new food sources. There is the enclosure. And there is the wheel. The wheel is not a toy. It is not enrichment in the traditional sense of that word. It is the closest thing to a solution that exists in a captive environment for one of the most fundamental biological drives a hamster has: the drive to move, to cover distance, to engage the body and the brain in the rhythmic, sustained, forward motion that millions of years of evolution have wired into every cell of their nervous system. When your hamster runs on the wheel at 3 a.m., they are not doing something quirky or eccentric or specifically nocturnal. They are fulfilling a biological imperative as fundamental to their well-being as eating or sleeping. And the fact that they're doing it at 3 a.m. is not incidental. It's not a choice they made about timing. It is because 3 a.m. is when their biology tells them to be active, when their cortisol and melatonin and body temperature all align to produce peak physical readiness, peak cognitive alertness, peak drive to move and explore and engage. Your hamster is not a creature of your schedule. They are a creature of their own biology, and their biology says, night is when we run. But here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, and where the real answer to why the wheel at 3 a.m. becomes something much more layered and interesting than the simple explanation most people assume. Because not all 3 a.m. wheel running is the same. And the difference between healthy wheel running and problematic wheel running is something you can actually hear, and once you know what to listen for, you will never hear that sound the same way again. There are two fundamentally different reasons your hamster runs on the wheel. One of them is a sign of a thriving, well-adjusted animal in a correctly meeting environment. The other is a sign of chronic stress and unmet need. And it looks and sounds almost identical from the outside. Almost, but not quite. And in this video, I'm going to teach you exactly how to tell the difference. If this is the kind of content you've been looking for, real, science-grounded understanding of what your hamster is actually experiencing, subscribe right now. Every video on this channel goes deeper into hamster psychology and behavior than anything else you'll find. Hit the like button if this is already making you think differently about your hamster. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? Tell me your city, your country. I want to see how far our hamster community reaches. I read every single comment. Now, let's talk about those two types of running, because understanding the difference is the key to understanding everything else in this video. The first type of wheel running is what behavioral scientists call voluntary locomotion, and the name tells you most of what you need to know. It is running that a hamster initiates freely, maintains for variable lengths of time, and stops when their body or interest tells them to stop. It is running that is interspersed with other behaviors: foraging, grooming, exploring the enclosure, investigating new scents, returning to the wheel, leaving again. It follows a natural rhythm that mirrors what the animal will be doing in the wild. Periods of movement, periods of pause, period of activity in other areas of the environment, then more movement. This type of running is healthy. It is good for your hamster's cardiovascular system, for their mental engagement, for their sleep quality, for the regulation of their stress hormones. Studies on hamster wheel behavior have consistently shown that access to a wheel significantly reduces cortisol levels and improves overall health markers in captive hamsters. The wheel, when running is voluntary and the animal has other options for how to spend their time, is genuinely beneficial. But the second type of wheel running is something entirely different. It's called stereotypic locomotion, and it is one of the most common and most overlooked signs of chronic stress in captive hamsters worldwide. Stereotypic locomotion looks like this. The hamster gets on the wheel and runs, and runs, and runs, without stopping, without variation, without the natural breaks and behavioral alternations that characterize voluntary movement. The running becomes compulsive, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a genuine neurological sense. The animal is not choosing to run because running is meeting a need. The animal is running because the wheel is the only avenue through which a completely unmet drive, the drive to cover distance, to explore, to move through varied terrain, can find any expression at all, and in the absence of other options, the behavior loops. It cannot stop because the underlying need that's driving it is never actually satisfied. This distinction is critical. Voluntary wheel running satisfies. Stereotypic wheel running does not satisfy. It only temporarily discharges a pressure that immediately rebuilds. A hamster running voluntarily will get off the wheel and go do something else. A hamster running stereotypically will stay on the wheel until exhaustion forces him off, and then often return almost immediately. And here is how you tell the difference just by listening. Voluntary running has rhythm, but also has variation. You'll hear the wheel spinning steadily, and then it will slow. There will be a pause. Then it might start again at a different pace. The sound is present but not relentless. There's breathing room in it, space where other sounds come in, the scratch of digging, the rustle of bedding being rearranged, the soft sound of the water bottle being used. Your hamster is moving through their environment, and the wheel is one part of that movement. Stereotypic running sounds different. It's faster and it's constant. The wheel spins at a higher speed and it doesn't stop, or when it does stop, it starts again almost immediately, with barely a pause between. There's an urgency in the sound that's distinct from the easy rhythm of voluntary running. And if you were to watch, rather than just listen, you'd see a hamster whose posture on the wheel is also different, more rigid, more mechanical, less fluid, because the brain driving the behavior is operating from a place of pressure rather than natural motivation. Now, beyond the distinction between these two types of running, there's another layer to the 3 a.m. behavior that most people have never considered, and it has to do not just with why your hamster runs, but with what they're experiencing emotionally and cognitively while they run. Research on hamster locomotion has revealed something that should fundamentally change how you think about those hours when your hamster is active and you're asleep. Hamsters who run on wheels in enriched environments with sufficient space, appropriate substrate depth, foraging opportunities, and varied stimulation, show measurable increases in hippocampal neurogenesis during and after wheel running. In plain language, running stimulates the growth of new brain cells in the memory and learning centers of the hamster's brain. Their cognitive function improves. Their capacity to navigate, to remember, to process their environment. All of it benefits from the running. But this only happens under the right conditions. In an undersized, understimulating environment, where the running is stereotypic rather than voluntary, the neurological benefits are dramatically reduced or absent entirely. The body is running, but the brain is not being enriched by it, because the behavior has become compulsive rather than exploratory. The difference between these two states is not visible in the running itself. It is visible in everything surrounding the running, in the enclosure, in the enrichment, in the other behaviors a hamster shows during their active hours. Which means that 3 a.m. wheel running is not just about the wheel. It is a window into the entire quality of your hamster's environment and inner life. And once you know how to read that window, you have information that can genuinely change what your hamster experiences every night for the rest of their life. Let me tell you about something that happened in a research setting that I think about every time I hear someone describe their hamster's nighttime behavior as just what hamsters do. In a series of behavioral studies on captive rodents, researchers compared two groups of hamsters. Both groups had wheels. Both groups had standard housing. The only significant difference was that one group's enclosure was enriched, deep substrate for burrowing, foraging opportunities, varied objects to investigate, sufficient space to express natural exploratory behavior. The other group lived in standard commercial housing. Both groups ran on the wheel, but the way they ran was completely different. The enriched group ran in patterns that closely mirrored wild hamster movement, varied speed, natural breaks, integration with other behaviors. The unenriched group ran in compulsive, repetitive, high-speed pattern that we now recognize as stereotypic locomotion. And when the researchers tracked health outcomes over time, the differences were stark. The enriched group showed better immune function, lower baseline cortisol, longer average lifespan, and significantly higher rates of the kind of brain cell growth that we associate with cognitive health and emotional well-being. The wheel was the same. The running was superficially the same. But what was happening inside the two animals while they ran was completely different. And the only variable was whether their environment was genuinely meeting their needs. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it means something very specific and very practical for you and your hamster. If you listen to your hamster running at 3 a.m., and what you hear is that relentless, fast, non-stopping sound, the stereotypic pattern, then what you are hearing is not your hamster thriving in their natural nocturnal rhythm. What you are hearing is your hamster's brain trying, night after night, to satisfy a drive that their environment is not equipped to meet. And the wheel is the only place that drive has to go. The good news, and there is genuinely good news here, is that this is fixable. Stereotypic wheel running in hamsters has been shown to decrease significantly and relatively quickly when the environment is correctly adjusted. You do not need to start over. You do not need to buy an entirely new setup. You need to address the specific environmental gaps that are driving behavior. And in most cases, those gaps fall into one of three categories. The first is enclosure size. We talked about this in the last video, but it bears repeating in this context. A hamster whose enclosure doesn't give him sufficient space to move through varied terrain during their active hours will default to the wheel as a substitute for that movement. Increasing the floor space, even significantly, often produces a visible and rapid reduction in stereotypic running, because suddenly the hamster has other places to go and other things to engage with during those hours. The second is substrate depth. This one is underestimated even by owners who have correctly sized enclosures. Hamsters in the wild spend enormous amounts of their active time burrowing, digging, tunneling, creating and maintaining complex underground spaces. This behavior is not optional for them any more than running is. It engages the same deep-wired physical and cognitive drives. When substrate is too shallow to burrow properly, less than 6 inches, ideally deeper, the hamster cannot fulfill this drive, and the unmet need contributes directly to the compulsive quality of the wheel running. Provide sufficient substrate depth and the burrowing behavior reemerges almost immediately. And when burrowing is available, wheel running naturally distributes itself more evenly throughout the active hours rather than concentrating into those long, relentless sessions. The third is foraging opportunity. In the wild, a significant portion of your hamster's nighttime movement is in service of finding food, not just eating food that's in a bowl but searching for it, following scent trails, investigating new areas, using their extraordinary nose to locate buried or hidden food items. When food is always in the same bowl in the same spot, this entire dimension of nocturnal behavior is simply absent, and the energy and cognitive engagement that would have gone into foraging has nowhere else to go. Scatter feeding, hiding small amount of food throughout the substrate in different locations each night, reactivates the foraging drive and gives your hamster's brain meaningful work to do during the hours when their biology is primed for exactly that kind of activity. When all three of these things are in place, appropriate space, appropriate substrate depth, appropriate foraging opportunity, the wheel running changes. It becomes what it was always meant to be, one part of rich, varied nocturnal life, rather than the only option available. And at 3 a.m., instead of that relentless spinning, you hear something different. You hear movement, varied, textured, purposeful movement through an environment that is genuinely meeting your hamster's needs. The wheel spins for a while, then it slows, then there's digging, then quiet, then the wheel again, briefly, then more foraging sounds, then silence, because your hamster has gone back into their burrow, satisfied, to rest. That's what a good night sounds like for a hamster. And once you hear it, once you experience the difference, you'll understand immediately why getting there is worth every change it takes. Let me pull everything together, because I want to make sure you leave this video with a complete and actionable understanding of what we've covered and what to do with it. Your hamster runs on the wheel at 3 a.m. because their biology is most alive at 3 a.m. Their entire nervous system, their hormones, their temperature regulation, their cognitive drive, aligns in night hours to produce an animal that is ready to move, ready to explore, ready to engage their world in ways that are deeply wired into everything they are. This is not a nuisance. This is not a quirk. This is one of the most fundamental expressions of your hamster being exactly what they are. But the quality of that nighttime activity, whether it looks like healthy, voluntary, varied exploration, or like compulsive, repetitive, stereotypic running, tells you something critical about whether the environment you've built for your hamster is genuinely meeting their needs or only partly meeting them. And now you know how to tell the difference. The sound of voluntary running, rhythmic, varied, interspersed with other behaviors, at a pace that feels natural and flowing. The sound of stereotypic running, fast, relentless, continuous, with barely any pause. The sound of a drive that's trying to find satisfaction in the only channel available to it. If what you hear is the voluntary kind, congratulations, your hamster's environment is working. What you're hearing at 3 a.m. is not a problem to be solved. It is the sound of an animal living a full and physically engaged life within the constraints of a captive environment. If what you hear is the stereotypic kind, you now have 3 specific places to look: enclosure size, substrate depth, foraging opportunity. Address those 3 things in order, and watch what happens to the running over the following weeks. The change, when the environment is genuinely adjusted, is not subtle or gradual. It is relatively rapid, and it is unmistakable. The behavior shifts because the underlying need is finally being met, and met properly, not just approximated. I also want to say something about the wheel itself, because it's worth being specific. Not all wheels are equally appropriate for hamsters, and the wrong wheel can actually contribute to stress and physical harm, even when the hamster uses it voluntarily. The wheel should be solid, not wire mesh or barred, which can catch feet and cause injury. It should be an appropriate size, at minimum 8 to 10 inches in diameter for a Syrian hamster, smaller for dwarf varieties, but still appropriately sized for their body. It should spin silently, or as close to silently as possible, because a squeaking wheel disrupts the hamster's own sensory environment as well as yours. And it should stand stably without wobbling, so the running motion is smooth and correctly distributes the hamster's weight. A correctly sized, correctly designed wheel in a correctly sized, correctly enriched environment is one of the best things you can provide for your hamster's physical and cognitive health. Every rotation is neural stimulation, cardiovascular benefit, stress hormone regulation. Every rotation, in the right context, is your hamster's brain growing slightly more resilient and healthy. That is what that 3 a.m. sound can mean when everything around it is right. The next video in this series goes somewhere that I think is going to genuinely surprise you. We've talked about stress. We've talked about environment. We've talked about what your hamster's behavior communicates about their inner state. But in the next video, we're going to talk about something different. The specific moments when your hamster's behavior is telling you something is wrong, not with their environment, but with their health. The early warning signs that most hamster owners miss completely because they don't know what they're looking at. The behaviors that look normal, that look like just your hamster being your hamster, but that, if you know what to look for, are actually your hamster telling you they need help. That video could genuinely save your hamster's life. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Hit subscribe right now if you haven't yet. The button is right there. Hit like on this video if it changed something about how you understand your hamster. And leave a comment below telling me, does your hamster run at night? And now that you've heard the difference between voluntary and stereotypic running, which one does yours sound like? Tell me what you've been hearing. I read every comment, and I want to know what's happening in your hamster's worlds at 3 a.m. And if you have a friend who has a hamster, someone who's complained about the nighttime wheel noise, or someone who's never thought twice about it, share this video with them. Because that sound at 3 a.m. is saying something. And now you know how to listen. I'll see you in the next one.